Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions. Monday morning, 9 to 10 o'clock. We answer your questions about condos and homeowners associations, some of the things that you may be dealing with or having questions about. We're here to help you out. My name is Mark Breckbill. I am a local CPA and also a licensed community association manager, and have been practicing in this area since 1994. So have been working in the condo area for a fairly long time. Spent some time and continue to spend some time on the Florida Institute of Certified Public Accountants CIRA committee, which is their condo and HOA committee at the state level, which interacts directly with the DBPR and the division relative to condos and HOAs. So have had an opportunity to kind of see a few things in the days, and that's been good. And I'm here to help pass that along with Peter Mullengarden. Peter is our attorney, and he's been doing this for a lot longer than me. He's been working in this area for some extended period of time, originally starting out doing some legislative type things, really, and then ultimately moving into the area of primarily supporting and providing help to the associations directly, condos and HOAs. So he has a tremendous background in the area, and those of you that have been following us know that he's also got a specialty in this area now, and has been working in this area for, well, in excess of 35 years, I think it is what it is, maybe closer to 40 now. So he started when he was 5. But anyway, he's our attorney expert, and many of you know he's fantastic. He's been doing this for a long, long time. So it's a community service program. It's here for you. You can call in. The number is 772-220-9788. That's 772-220-WSTU 9788. Anyway, you can give us a call. Evan will get you on the air. All we need is a name. We don't actually need yours, but we need a name. We don't need the association, just the name and your question. We don't deal with the association name for a number of reasons, one of which is that we don't want people who are listening to think that it doesn't apply to them because it's a different association, because many of you know a lot of these problems are very similar. And so sometimes somebody's asking for another association, but the circumstances and the situation is the same or similar, and we can potentially provide their answer as well. They may be too shy to call or not want to call. It is a situation where sometimes the answers are a little different, so we talk a little broader. Sometimes we will go a little bigger than your problem, or a little wider sometimes, and that's just so that others who may be listening that have a little bit different circumstances will get their question answered as well. So be patient with us on that. The process, like I said, is pretty straightforward. The only caveat we have is that we, as we always say, we don't have your documents. And for those of you that are familiar with this industry or familiar with associations, know that the documents are very, very important and can dictate a different answer. Also, sometimes if certain language isn't in the documents, then you can't, then certain things aren't applicable. And so sometimes when you're trying to fix a problem, if your documents are missing some information, it's sometimes important that first you fix your documents, then you go ahead and address the specific problem. For example, fining. Sometimes, we talk about fines. Well, fines are fine in this industry, but as long as you have provisions in your documents to be able to fine. If you don't have those, then you may have a problem. So there's things like that we try to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up on and try to help you out with. But those are the things that sometimes we can't answer 100% because we don't have your documents. And we'll give you the best answer we can based on your interpretation of what your documents say and some of the things that are in your documents and how they're set up, which we know is confusing sometimes and conflicting sometimes, as well as standard rules and regulations and laws and all of those kind of things. So we'll try to do that. But good morning, Peter. How are you this morning? Are you there? Oops. Wait a minute. Is trying to get see if we got Peter on the line today. But okay. He's it looks like we have some technical difficulties, and he'll be calling in, I think. But so we'll still get your call. We've been it's actually been interesting since the pandemic. Even though I'm in the studio, Evan's in the studio. Peter was always down south, so he would call in. But lately, for the last month or so, he's been doing it by Zoom, and which normally works really well because he doesn't tie up a telephone line. And some of it's when you call in, sometimes we don't pick up right away, and we have to kind of juggle a little bit because if Peter's talking and we have somebody on the line, we have to put them on hold, and of course, if Peter's on, we can't put him on hold, so we got to put a hold on to pick up a call. So sometimes it's a little bit tricky. But the Zoom has been working pretty well. But I think today, for some reason or another, Zoom doesn't want to always work that well. So, but we're getting it set up, and Peter will be on the line with us and joining us in just a second. So we'll get him on. Good morning, Peter. How are you? Are you there? Now, are you there? Peter, are you there? Peter.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Are you on
Hi.
Verizon? Can I hear you now?
I think some Russians hacked my computer. Is there something going on tomorrow?
Not that I know of. Yeah.
Okay.
It's no, I think we're okay. So we're glad to have you here this morning. We have our first caller, so we'll get her on. Go ahead.
Good morning.
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 Okay. We budgeted $135,000 for insurance. Our bill was $135,000. We budgeted $185,000 a year ago. The insurance was only $150,000, so there was $35,000 left in the budget. This year they budgeted $190,000. We never get to see the insurance bill, but we do know, we think, that we borrow money at the rate of $10,000 or $11,000 a month to pay that insurance bill. So my question is, if we're over budgeting 35 or 40, whatever, can that money be used to purchase an annuity, or do we have to hold that in the insurance budget for the following year?
Well, okay. The answer, I mean, I'll let Mark do the deep dive into the annuity stuff. But basically, anything on your operating side, any line item there, and the insurance would be on the operating side of your budget, not the reserve schedule. Operating funds can be moved around by the board. When I say moved around, if you're over budgeted in one item, let's say insurance, and you're under budgeted in another item, let's say maintenance or day-to-day maintenance, that money can be used for any operating purpose. They're not locked into those specific categories like reserve funds are locked in. Whether you have a pooled reserve, whether it's locked into the entire pool, or it's a line item where they're locked into each item, you can't just take money out of reserves and use it for something else like insurance or something. But here, on the operating side, excuse me, those funds, like I said, they can be used for any operating expense. and it's quite common, for an association, to use the monies for whatever, if they're high in one and low in another category.
I understand that, but we're over budgeting for insurance every year by at least $35,000.
Well, I know you said that, but I'm assuming that, I don't know what happens at the end of the year, because clearly, Mark and I don't have your financial statements in front of us, but the entire budget is a guesstimate, right? So although it may be over budgeted for insurance, there could have been under budgets for other items, and it all came out in the wash. Or maybe you had a little bit of a surplus at the end of the year, okay, after everything came out in the wash, between overs and unders, and then that money ends up typically getting rolled over into next year's budget. Many associations, I can't speak for yours, many associations do over budget, and Mark always says this, you should, quite frankly, over budget or have a cushion. You shouldn't just budget to the penny, because things happen, and budgets, like I said, are just guesstimates.
Okay, so if we over budgeted for insurance last year by $35,000, and now this year we're over budgeting $40,000, can that money that's in for insurance be used to buy an annuity?
No, but the whole annuity thing, we've talked about this, and I'll let Mark go into this more. I don't care where the money comes from. The annuity sounds like it's not proper to begin with. Period. Okay.
Well, it's not because.
But if that money, I'll just leave it at this, and then I'll let Mark talk about the annuity. That, for one thing, you should base your budget on estimated costs. Okay. Usually, the prior budget is your baseline. Insurance can change, but if you have estimates, or you have the amount that it is going in because you have bids or whatever, but then you budget accordingly. But generally speaking, the prior year's expenses are used as a baseline. It's not the gospel, because things change and you have anticipated expenses that may differ, but your operating budget is based on the anticipated operating expenses coming up. Now, when you have, I don't care where the surplus is from, whether it's from insurance, whether it's from maintenance, whether it's from accounting, whether it's from legal, whatever it is. If you're over in certain categories, that surplus can be used for other operating expenses. In fact, it can be used even for, quote, reserve expenses, because if your reserves are low and you have a reserve expenditure, then you can use, if you have high operating, you can use some of that towards that particular expenditure for a roof or paving or something like that. But the annuity thing is a whole different animal, and has really nothing to do with, can you use surplus insurance funds for that? The answer was, if that was a legitimate expense, yes, you could. If it's not a legitimate expense, no, you couldn't. It really has nothing to do with where the funds are coming from. It's whether or not that expense is proper.
Right.
Yeah. So here's a couple things. One, this is the thing that people have a hard time with a lot of times is, and this is why I say that you do have to budget a cushion, particularly in the area of insurance, because here's what happens. There's a difference between cash and expense. So you have $135,000 insurance expense, right?
Yes.
Or whatever that number happens to be for this year. Let's say it's 135. And so you're going to collect $135,000 from everybody for insurance, right? Because that's in your budget, or the 150 or the whatever it is, whatever that number is, you're going to collect that, but you're not going to collect that up front when your insurance payment is due, right? So you're going to have $135,000 expense, but you have to pay it, let's say, up front. Well, you don't have cash. Where'd you get the cash? The only way to get the cash is to borrow it. And that's what many associations end up doing. They end up borrowing on their insurance, borrowing to pay their insurance. Now, that cost is not normally very, very expensive, but it is an interest cost. It's a loan.
They finance their insurance.
Right. They finance their insurance. So some associations, in an effort to get rid of that, and not have that financing cost, because, a lot of the members say, well, we don't want to pay debt costs. We don't want to pay financing costs. And then but they also don't want a special assessment. They're saying, well, we're paying for insurance. We don't want a special assessment. So what happens sometimes is the association will create a surplus over a couple, 2, 3, 4 years period of time, so that the amount of money that they need to borrow is less. So the first year, the payment is still $135,000, but they've got $35,000 already in cash, so they only have to finance $100,000. And then the next year, they've got $70,000 in cash, and they only have to fund $65,000 or whatever. So they whittle away at it over a period of time. That's one thing. The other thing that some associations do incorrectly, because Peter appropriately pointed out that insurance is an operating expense, it is not a reserve expense.
Right.
But some associations incorrectly reserve for their insurance expense. They put it into their reserve funds, which you're not allowed to do. And so sometimes they'll put extra in there because what they do is they're budgeting for the deductible. And again, that is not the way to do it. It's two separate items. The insurance should be budgeted through the operating budget for insurance, and the deductible should be budgeted through the reserves as a separate reserve item, not deductible, because you can't reserve for deductible per se. But what you want to do is have a reserve for uninsured capital costs due to storms or something of that nature.
Well, I think you could reserve for the deductible, so we may agree to disagree on that.
Well, I don't want to do that because the deductible, some portion of it, if it's not going to capital, if it's going to other things, may be considered non-capital expenditures, and for tax purposes, you may create a huge tax problem for your reserves. It may bring all your reserves into income for tax purposes. So to be safe, it's good to budget for that thing. I think you should budget for the amount, because there's going to be a lot of uninsured expenses, fencing and all kinds of things like that. And they are capital items and they'll qualify, but it's good to set that up, because not only do you need to budget for the deductible, but any of those items that aren't even covered, that are specifically excluded. And that's why insurance has a tendency to bounce around too, is that from time to time, depending upon what you include in, what you decide to pay for and include in your insurance coverage, will determine what's uninsured or not covered.
Right.
And that item is going to be above and beyond the deductible. So some people say, oh yeah, we're good. We can handle the deductible, and don't realize that they've got another $200,000 or $300,000 of uninsurable items that they have to have on top of their deductible. So that's the first thing, make a point, is that there are differences between expense and cash. And so sometimes you've got the expense, but the expense isn't incurred evenly over the year. It's, up front, and then you got to borrow to pay it up front, even though eventually you're going to have the cash. So that's the item there. The item relative to annuities, as we've talked about previously, an annuity is not going to be a legitimate investment. It's not going to meet the criteria. It doesn't meet the state criteria as a legitimate investment. In fact, the state is after the associations that are doing that kind of thing, because it's not a legitimate. It is not a legitimate investment for an association. It's just like it may be a great investment, and I'm not opposed to annuities per se for people individually. It can be a nice tool for financial planning purposes, and we use it a lot of times in certain situations, but it does not make sense for a homeowners association or a condo association. It is well beyond the risk level that is appropriate. And frankly, I think boards that invest in those types of things are opening themselves up to personal liability, especially if they've been told and or they're professionals in the industry and understand the risk level associated with the investment and choose to take it anyway. So we've talked about that, and that, in fact, and we at the beginning of the show I mentioned about documents, and most documents prohibit that type of thing because they limit your investments to insured financial institutions, many of which say insured financial institutions in the state of Florida or in the in the county or whatever. So right there you're violating your documents, which will take precedent over whatever else anything is anyway. So
I mean, it's written in an individual's name.
Right. That's even that's a big problem. Yep. Mm-hmm. So it's written in an individual's name. So that's a personal use of association funds, which is considered basically theft. So therefore, the person that's doing that is probably looking at jail time. I mean, because you're stealing from the association, actually. So
there was like a phone vote.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. You can't vote. You can't vote for fraud. So I mean,
right? You can't. Yeah, you can't vote something in to make it right when it's wrong.
Yeah. The point is, I think a lot of people didn't understand that. I understand annuities. A few other people also did. We know that they shouldn't be written in an individual's name. We know that they shouldn't be purchased, for the association. But we never got the final vote on who voted for it, and if these people even understood what they were, that money should not be used to buy an annuity. Now, if it comes down to a point where this is found out, or somebody makes a complaint, or whatever, do the people that voted for it, whether they understood it or not, are they liable also?
I think that probably in an association like this, an association where they're volunteers, that is the purpose of 617, which is the statute that most of the condos and HOAs are chartered under. That's the not-for-profit corporate statute, and so it probably does protect them from liability because of the fact that they're volunteers and they really aren't, they may not have had any kind of sophisticated financial training and may not understand it. And I'd say probably they would be protected. Even somebody who understands what an annuity is may not understand that it's not appropriate for an association and all that. I think the people that are at risk are the people that are especially if one of the individuals involved is a investment advisor or a broker. I think they're going to be at risk. I think that the people that are primarily pushing it may be at risk because they didn't do their due diligence in terms of realizing that they're in violation of investment policy. If you set up a person or a group of people to be your investment committee and to have the authority to make those decisions, they do have a responsibility at that point to at least look at your documents to see what are legal investments for the association. Right. And so I think they may have some liability because that's not a high bar. If my job is to invest company money, I
should know what I'm doing with it.
Well, I should at least know what I can invest in and what I can't invest in. I may not always know 100% about what that investment is. What is a mutual fund? What is an exchange traded fund? I may not fully understand all of that. And I'm relying on a professional to tell me that. So I might be okay there. But if I can't do it at all because my documents specifically say you can't invest in anything other than, then as soon as I do something else, I've probably reached over the line, especially if there's some benefit, even if it's an ancillary benefit for me personally. So if I do the annuity and I do it in my name because it has to be in an individual name, and I do it in my name, and as a result of that, it's not an ownership, I'm just the annuitant. But let's say that I do it that way, and then I get some other benefit out of that through annuities that I might be purchasing for myself. I'm getting a discount, I'm getting better terms, better pricing, or whatever. because I'm running it through my broker and I ran the association one through my broker. That's a personal benefit. And that's going to be something that's going to be looked at as beyond the protections of the normal, director responsibility. Because I don't want to scare directors. I mean, you don't have to know everything about everything. But when you step forward and take the position that you do know everything about everything, you automatically start putting yourself into a different category, particularly if you can get some personal benefit out of that. They're not going to let you argue that it was a mistake.
Okay, so then the broker, should know this.
Well, the broker, if a broker is investing money for, I used to be the chief financial officer of a bank. So my responsibility when I was working in the banking industry was to invest money, the bank's money. And one of the things that the broker always wanted to know is, do I have the authority? Do I have the authority to make the investment, or is it take a committee or somebody else to approve it? So that was the first thing. Do I have the authority to make the decision individually? Which is another situation that your documents may not allow that as a single decision. It may require a board decision, and it may specifically require a board decision in advance of the investment purchase.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Do I have the authority to make that? And then the second thing is it an authorized investment of the bank? So, for example, banks can invest in futures contracts and all kinds of things. Under banking law, you had the ability to invest in all of that, but I couldn't invest in that if the bank itself didn't allow it. It would require the board to modify the bank's investment policy to allow those investments, because we had an investment policy. And that is one thing I would say, that associations, if they are going to start investing in things other than CDs, primarily, they really should have an investment policy. What is allowed? Are treasury securities allowed? Okay. Well, if they're allowed, are 30-year treasury securities allowed? Because there's a whole lot more risk in a 30-year treasury security than in a 1-year treasury bill. So, so the association and the board needs to establish a policy, and the board needs to be educated as to what that means and why they're going to allow those. Because when you start moving into that extra category, those extra types of investments beyond the relatively safe CD type things that are insured, you better make sure that you understand what risks you're taking and that you're willing to delegate that risk. If I have a 30-year bond and I buy a 30-year bond in today's market, and interest rates go up 1%, that bond is going to go down that bond value is going to go down about 8%. You're going to lose 8% on your investment at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand that, in this environment where interest rates are historically low,
mm-hmm.
if those rates bounce back up to the 8% range from where they are now, you could be talking at somewhere close to a 60 or 70% decrease in the bond value, unless you hold it for 30 years or until interest rates go back to 2%. So those are the kind of things that when you get beyond the standard, and you really do need to be educated, the board needs to have a policy that states exactly what they're going to allow or not allow, based on their documents. And if the documents don't allow that and the board wants to do it, then it has to be modified. So that's what really you should do if you're going to go beyond the simple CD type situation.
Right. No, my only other question was, is the broker that brokered the annuities, doesn't he have to know Florida statutes? Not know them, but would he have knowledge of the fact that you're not supposed to buy annuities for associations, that an individual's name has to be on it? It can't be the association's name. And if the beneficiary is the association.
Well, probably not. Probably that the broker would have to, they don't have to know Florida law, but they have an obligation. This is a requirement of all brokers. They have a fiduciary responsibility to determine the risk tolerance of their investor. All right. Now, most of them just hand out a little questionnaire, and you sign it, and next thing you know, you're investing in penny stocks. But they do have an obligation, and they take it seriously. And if they work for a larger brokerage firm, that brokerage firm takes it very seriously because they will get sued. So they have an obligation to ask the question that I was saying. They have an obligation to ask the question, what does your investment policy allow? And if they say we don't have an investment policy, they would have an obligation to say, well, then I need to see whatever your bylaws or documents. I need to find out if there's any restrictions on what I can invest in. And they should ask that question. And if they don't, they're going to take some liability. And I'm pretty sure, it'll get settled because you have to go to mediation in that kind of situation, or arbitration. I'm sorry. But they'll be sued. There's no question about it. If that thing turns out they lose money on it, and or they get stuck with it and can't get out of it, they'll, and they work for any kind of large brokerage firm. Now, if they're a small independent, they may not have they may lose their license, but they may not have the backing to get your money back.
Well, actually, I mean, I think the guy works for a bank, but that's all aside from that. When you buy an annuity, you can't just walk in with the association check if it's not going to be listed in the association name. So you have to have a check or cash that comes from the annuitant. So,
but there's three different aspects of an annuity, which makes it complicated. An annuity is an insurance policy, so there has to be an individual who's the annuitant, the person whose life it's based on, right?
Okay.
But that doesn't have to be the owner of the policy. Somebody else can own the policy. So you could have you could conceivably have somebody own the policy, and the person's the annuitant, and then somebody different can be the beneficiary. The owner doesn't necessarily have to be the beneficiary. So the beneficiary could be the annuitant, or the beneficiary could be
the association is the annuitant. The beneficiary.
Yeah, so the association's beneficiary. The annuitant is the person they put on there for their individual life, and then the owner of the policy is going to be could be a corporation in some cases. Insurance corporations can buy insurance products. They just can't be based on their lives. So there are situations where now an annuity, it would be potentially justified in situations where, let's say I've got a retirement plan for my company and I've got an unfunded liability within my retirement plan. I can get rid of that unfunded liability by buying an annuity for that person, and that annuity takes away my unfunded liability because it's automatically funded at that point. So there are ways that you can have different people. Now, in that case, the retirement person is the beneficiary, not the corporation. And so what would happen here, though, is using an individual as an annuitant is an issue, even if they're not necessarily the beneficiary. First of all, it opens up confusion relative to who actually has rights under the policy.
And who's the owner then?
Do what?
Who's the owner?
Well, it depends on how the policy is written. It depends on how the insurance policy is written. If the person was given the money to buy the policy and become the annuitant, then the owner would be the individual. If the corporation bought the annuity, but used the individual, the board member individual as the annuitant, then the owner would be the corporation. Where it gets confusing is this: did the corporation intend to buy the annuity and become the owner, especially since your documents prohibit it, or and law prohibits it, or was the corporation loaning the money to the annuitant? And so maybe that annuity is actually the individual's. The other thing that's an issue there is that depending upon what kind of annuity it is, you may not get your money back unless you annuitize it, which means that you're now going to have to pay it out based on that individual's life. Well, what kind of health was that person in? Well, there's prudent decisions there. If that person had some kind of injury or illness or whatever that's going to shorten their lifespan, that could have been a really bad investment because you might not get your money back, because when you annuitize it, you may not get your money back. Right. That's why they're not allowed, because there's an awful lot of risk involved in these transactions. And I don't care how they did it. It's not going to be allowed. And I don't care what happens. That broker is going to have problems. That bank is going to have problems. Because.
Well, I guess what you're saying is, or you're not, we have a right to see that annuity.
Yes.
And we have been asking for a couple of years, and we just cannot, just like the insurance policy, they will not show it. They don't have it. We go into February, March, April, they didn't get it yet.
It's real easy on this.
That's when you have to. When you have to take legal action.
That's right. That's what I was going to say.
I mean, they can say no, 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 no. And at the end of the day, just like anything else, unless you force someone to do it or to do something, then you're just going to turn blue in the face. And you would have to take action to compel them to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So as board members, collect, as a group or singly, we could go in and ask for these things, and we have a right to have these papers. We keep on getting put off and put off.
Here's what, and I apologize for interrupting, but here's what I think I'm getting at, and what Peter's getting at. You don't have to be a board member. No, right. This is a non-board member issue. You individually can call Peter. You can say he can file paperwork that will get you a copy of that, or get them in a fine situation with the state, but he can get you a copy of that document probably within 60 days. They can't stall it more than 60 days, and he'll have a copy of that document in your hand, or he'll have the state up there. But
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, you don't even need an attorney per se. You can just, make a complaint with the state that they're not complying with the record inspection requirements, and the state will, eventually, or should, write to them, and then, basically pursue them for a violation, like Mark said, and they could be fined, but they would also be required at some point to produce the records.
Yeah, and the reason I'm saying use Peter or somebody like him is because when you make the request, he will make sure the request is exactly the way it needs to be, that it goes in the manner it's supposed to go, that it's addressed the way it's supposed to be addressed, so that they're forced to answer it. So that's the first thing. So, then they're forced to answer it. And if they don't answer it, that's strike one against them with the state, because you did it the way you had to do it statutorily. And you're not asking for every document. You're asking for a very specific document or documents. So, that's where that's why I would use an attorney in that situation, even though you can do it individually, just to make sure I got it right. Because I know the association is going to fight it. So I know I'm going to have to go to the state. So I want to be able to say to the state, no, I asked correctly. I did it the way I was supposed to do it. I addressed it the way I was supposed to do it. I'm asking only for the specific documents. And then if they refuse, it's a records violation. And then the state will eventually they will make them do it, because there's no real argument in this area to a records violation like this.
Okay.
So that's how I would do it.
Okay.
But again, back to your original question, because I just want to emphasize this for some of the other listeners. There is, when you're doing budgeting, there is a difference between cash and expense. And many, many times, if you don't budget a little bit of a surplus over a period of time, you can't pay certain expenses without borrowing money. And most of your members don't want to incur borrowing costs when they don't have to. But you have to if you don't have the cash to pay your insurance when it's due. because very few associations does your insurance actually come due at the end of your year. Some do, some do in November, December, but many of them it comes in, early in your
January,
year.
first of the year.
Yeah, January, February, March. And so that's tough to come up with the cash, and they end up borrowing. Like I said, the financing isn't usurious. It isn't out of the ordinary, really. It's not a big number normally compared to the insurance itself, but it's still a cost that you don't have to incur if you're budgeting for it and you're building up a surplus. And you can use some of that surplus as you can be on the other side of the coin. You can be earning some interest until such time as you need to pay that. So
Right.
we just wanted to make that comment again. That is a good thing to look at.
Okay.
All right.
You've been very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate your call. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's the other thing, Peter, I wanted to get back to a little bit was this. I know because we touched on it, and it's this deductible situation with insurance, and I think it's a huge risk right now coming in with the fact that there is starting, these deductibles now are 2%, or these deductibles are 2% or 5% or whatever they're becoming. And that number by itself is a fairly large number that's not being budgeted. And then on top of that, on top of of that, there are all these uninsured items now that the insurance companies have taken out of the mix. Things like docks and fences and landscaping and all of these kind of things that you just don't anticipate. And landscaping, because normally landscape maintenance and landscape replacing is an operating expense. Typically, it's one of those kind of things where it doesn't usually get budgeted for even. So that can be a big item when you're replacing that. We have a caller, Jim. Go ahead. Jim, are you there? Hello? Hang on a minute. Are you there, Jim?
Hello?
Yeah, there you are.
Hello?
Okay,
I
sorry.
can hear him.
Got you. I'm sorry I couldn't hear.
Okay. If you can hear me, quick
Yeah.
question. At
Go.
this point in time, what state or county regulations authorize condo associations to adopt COVID restrictive rules? And if none are in existence, can I assume that the association could adopt condo restrictive rules, even if their documents don't address it, because this is such a new thing, as a private corporation?
It'll be tough to answer this in 5 minutes. Try to do this quick. I believe that the initial authority to adopt the COVID restrictions, if an association wanted to adopt the COVID restrictions, would be generated through the emergency powers section of the Condominium Act. And even though some people can argue that those emergency powers really only apply to things like hurricanes and those kind of disasters, in my opinion, I think in most practitioners, basically what the emergency powers section says is that when the governor declares a state of emergency for the locality in which the condominium is located, at that point the board of directors has certain emergency powers. Among those is to prohibit or to restrict occupancy to portions of the condominium in order to protect the health, safety, welfare of the owners and the residents and their guests and their invitees. Again, in a natural disaster situation, that would be areas typically that are that have been damaged or have mold or things like that. I think you can apply it here to the COVID situation. So, which is why associations were able to shut down their pools and their gymnasiums and their fitness centers and the clubhouses and things like that. Because of the risk of the spread of the virus, as well as implement other restrictions regarding guest visitation and contractors and things like that, and impose all those things like mask wearing and that. Once that emergency power runs out, and unless it's extended, which I don't think it will be. It runs out this week, which was the last extension by Governor DeSantis. Now you have to fall back on an association's general rulemaking authority, which is not, quite frankly, has as much backing to it. But again, we don't have much time here, but arguably the board can adopt rules, regarding the use of their facilities to protect the health, safety, welfare. Does that go as far as shutting them down completely? That is not, there's no precedent for this. I think have taken a lot of factors in that case, including what is the rate of the infection, what is the positivity rate, what is the age of your residents, do they have a lot of comorbidities, things like that. So there's no real game plan once this emergency powers runs out. I still think when you take all those factors into account, I believe a board would still have the authority to adopt reasonable restrictions regarding COVID based on their general rulemaking authority. But we don't have any cases yet, to test this. So, but I think you have to be careful and adopt them based on the circumstances concerning your particular community, where it's located, age of the residents, things like that.
And I would tell you, Jim,
I still think you can, in my opinion.
I would tell you that I wouldn't do anything like any of this without member approval. I'd have kind of legal counsel and member approval. To me, this right now, I think your association can do whatever they want as long as the members approve. I think there's plenty of latitude, to take those restrictions. But as Peter said, there's no case law on this, and I think a lot of it's going to, come. It's going to be.
The member votes can, give more authority. I would say more about, what can the board do?
Yeah, that's right. But we're running out of time. Jim, why don't if this would be a good topic for next week? If you want to call back, we'd sure like to talk about it. And I can actually be closer. So give us a call. And we thank everybody for joining us here. Peter, as usual, thanks for all of your help and all of your guidance, and we appreciate it. Join us right here every Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock on Condo Solutions on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's heritage station right here in Stewart, Jensen Beach, Indiantown, and wherever else you can get us.